I have to apologize. This video is going to be fairly directionless. I only have a vaguely figured out notion of where I want to go with this topic. So I don't really know what to talk about this week. Last week and the week before, I spent a lot of time arguing with people over YouTube, or debating, arguing, debating, discussing, whatever you want to call it. And I'm pretty spent. I had 70 something comments on objective, the meaning of the word objective, and 120 comments on the Molyneux video with another guy who had a huge, took issue with some of the things I said, where I insulted Molyneux. I don't even remember what I talked about in that video, honestly, but 120 comments, right? That's how much I put into it, and like a dozen or so more comments with Marley and with Brian. You may not know who these people are. They're viewers of this channel, and it's exhausting. I don't know. Do arguments have a point? Does having debates with these people have any kind of positive effect on the world? Because I've yet to really convince someone. And maybe I have convinced people and I haven't noticed, because maybe I notice the flaws of a thing more than the merits. But I can't think of a time within my life where I've been arguing, ever since I was 15 or so, I've been deep within very argumentative. I've been very argumentative for a decade, almost a decade now, I think. And I can't think of a single time where I've won. I know it's bad to think about an argument as win-lose, but I can't think of a single time where I've been oh yes, I convinced the other guy completely, thoroughly. It's never gotten to that point. Usually what happens is, I've started arguing more and more ever since I entered university, and usually what happens is one side gives up. And in such a case, you can say that the other side can claim victory, but then, if the other side gives up, it doesn't mean you've convinced them, right? So, what actually happens is people get tired of arguing, and then they start saying, well, why do you spend your time doing this? Why do you spend your time so, avidly, devotedly, aggressively trying to convince people, right? What does it accomplish? Because most of the time you drive people away, or at least I tend to do that, and don't tend to I think it doesn't just take. It takes a certain type of character to convince people. It takes rhetoric. It takes charisma. I wish I could be one of these people that just, other people flock to you and want to support you because you can convince them of things and convince and drive them forward. But at the same time, I don't really want worshippers, because that's what that type of individual attracts. Someone with a strong image attracts worshippers, and worshippers, the problem with them is that they don't necessarily think freely. And if you become a little narcissistic, they'll still support you regardless of the bad things that you do. And that's bad, obviously, because if they support you when you're doing something bad, then you can become a bad influence without noticing it. And this, you can become corrupt, essentially. Although I don't think that power corrupts, absolutely. I think that's a fallacy. But there is that risk, right? Especially when you start to attract worshippers and not thinkers. But with thinkers, you have the opposite problem of constantly being in disagreement about core issues. So maybe you have to agree with people on core issues and allow disagreement on non-core issues, but where that line exactly is, it's it's a bother. So, like I said, there's no direction to this video. So disagreeing with people, and especially lately, I think I've become a bit more tolerant and less abrasive, less aggressive, less sort of dismissive of the other viewpoint, but still overly arrogant about some of the things, or at least how I present myself. And it's interesting because, or maybe just because I'm older, it's harder to convince people. I don't know, but the question I have is it possible to convince people? You know, is it? I mean, I know it's that people can change their views over like time by seeing, by hearing an argument over and over again until it eventually starts to sink in. But this process could take years. Is it possible to convince someone, during the argument? Is it possible to convince someone, face to face? Because that type of thing is something I've never experienced, and I want to know if that's possible. Because if it's not, if convincing people is something that takes time, then there's not much point to arguing, right? Unless, arguing is how you convince them, but that still takes time. It's just, how does it work? Have you ever convinced someone face to face? Because I want to know what that feels like. I really do. I've yet to experience it. The way I've noticed it, well, okay, I have and I haven't. Again, I've convinced people on certain things. I've convinced people, but I've also had to. I also had to concede certain points as well. It wasn't. I've never convinced them in the sense that I turned out to be completely right, they turned out to be completely wrong. We both sort of compromised. That's happened, and that's usually like what happens. I mean, from what I've noticed, there's like three stages to there's 3 or 4 stages to like an argument, and I've had like these arguments. They last like 4 hours. I've had like 4 or 5 hour arguments with friends, and the first hour or the first hour and a half or 2 are basically spent bitching at each other and attacking the other guy, and just and I've done this. I'm guilty of this, and I shouldn't be. And pretty much just asserting things that you believe to be totally true, that utterly dismantle, or that you think utterly dismantle the other guy's position, and there's basically no communication going on. It's just a back and forth of I'm right, you're wrong, and nothing actually gets done. Within the second hour, or like the third, usually the second hour, there's this phase where we finally get to the bottom of the definitions that we're using, the difference in definitions. And I've noticed this is the case all the time. There's always going to be some difference in definitions between you. I mean, I've yet to meet a person that has the exact same definitions that I do for things. So this second phase is where we start to unpack the various definitions that we're using, and if at times we figure out here that the argument was actually predicated on a miscommunication or a simple difference of definition, and that is it. And that's usually where this is figured out, the second phase. Now sometimes we figure out, we realize that it's not a difference in definition, it's a difference in axiom. It's a difference in assumption about the system we're working with. Well, one person has assumed one thing, another person has assumed another thing. And in the third phase, we are actually trying to rectify these assumptions. Now, usually this doesn't actually happen. The assumptions that one person has cannot be rectified by the other. And from what I've seen, the assumptions that are made are more or less predicated on some kind of genetic bias that one person has that the other does not. Some genetic instinct has led them to assume a certain thing about the world or a certain thing about morality that the other person simply cannot ever assume or accept. At least that's more or less my view. I mean, the way I see it is, if something wasn't genetic, if something was an assumption you made culturally due to cultural instincts, then if it's cultural, then it can be unlearned, so to speak. If it's cultural, you can unlearn it. You can, you can reject it. But then again, I've also argued with people who tend to be, who are more intelligent, amongst whom cultural differences don't really apply and genetic ones do. So the arguments you'd have with people in academia, for instance, boil down to genetic differences rather than cultural ones. But it could honestly be that certain cultural things can't be unlearned. I haven't really spent that much time arguing with deeply religious people, and religion is certainly a cultural phenomenon, not a genetic one. So where exactly, they probably can't be convinced either, or not easily. And I mean, at least for certain cultural phenomena, it has to be something that you've been learning, something that's been driven into your head from early childhood, to the point where you can't actually deny it or reject it at all, regardless of the rhetoric that you face. But I've never really been in a debate with someone like that. Now let's see, if the axioms, so this is the third phase where we actually look at one another's axioms, and if what can happen here is that we just understand that the axioms cannot ever be rectified. The assumptions about reality and about morality are just two fundamentally different assumptions, and we can't ever bring ourselves to accept the other one. At which point we diverge. We just say, we agree to disagree. Now, that's in the case where people are stubborn, and if they're not, then there's a fourth phase which covers the last hour or so. Every single phase takes about an hour, where what we're doing is we are compromising, because what we're trying to realize is that our axioms are things that are predicated on our experiences in our lives, and we are trying to unlearn them and compromise to reach a more objective mutual truth. And I had a discussion like this, recently. I was playing a video game with a bunch of friends, and we got into a huge fight, and it was a huge fight, and we spent like 4 hours discussing it, and in the end we sort of compromised, because what we realized is our assumptions about what the other guy was doing weren't accurate. And we reached a more greater truth by compromising. And the point is, it's in this fourth phase where you can compromise that you can actually reach the truth. From what I've noticed, I mean, if it's like this algorithm, right? Like in the second phase, if it's a miscommunication, if it's a difference of definition, then that's resolved in the second phase. If it's a difference in axiom, that's resolved in the third phase. If it's a difference in axiom that's rectifiable, if it's a difference in axiom that you can if it's a difference in axiom that is mimetic, not genetic, then you can compromise. And the question is, how do we skip all of the bullshit that happens within the first hour and just immediately jump to the second, third, or fourth phase, depending on the situation, right? Like, it's brutal, because every single argument essentially boils down to this. It boils down to one of three cases. Either you guys are using different words or different ideas. I mean, you're using the same words but describing different ideas. That's part one. Part two, you're using, you have fundamentally different assumptions about the nature of the world, which cannot change because neither of you is willing to compromise one for the other. And the third option is you have made a leap in judgment about the other person that wasn't true. That is the third case. I just want to skip to any of these three cases. And I mean, you should be able to do it if you've known people for long enough, because you could know them. If you know someone for a long time, you might know them well enough to be able to just instinctively jump to these three cases. But I don't know which of the three cases. It's hard. It is what I'm saying, because emotions are in play. That first phase, the first 2 hours of aggressive bullshit keep happening because we're just so angry. We just want to one-up the other guy, and I kept saying that's not what it should ever be about. I don't ever want to try to one-up the other guy. So ideally, what should happen is this: whenever there's a disagreement, whenever there's a disagreement, the first thing you should try and figure out is where it's coming from. So the first thing you should do is ask a question. The first thing you should do is ask a question. You should ask to try and figure out which of the three cases we are in, because these are the three cases where these are the three resolutions to the argument. There's a fourth possible resolution for the argument, which is that you insult the other guy, he insults you, and you just go separate ways because you've just hurt each other's feelings and gone in separate ways. But you want to avoid that one, obviously. These are the three, other solutions, and two of these solutions are good. The first and third one. The second one is pretty bad. You have just fundamentally different assumptions. That's one you want to avoid, but people are different to an extent, so you can't necessarily avoid that one. But it's important to try. I mean, I think it would be so much better if we could just jump to these three, figure out which case we're in right from the start. So I guess what you should do when you find someone that disagrees with you is immediately ask, wait a second, what do you mean by the words that you're saying? What words are you using? Sorry, what ideas are represented by the words that you're using right now? Because figuring that out, if figuring out the terminology is what leads us into case number one, right? It's how we figure out if there's a difference in definition. Case number two is the second question you should ask is, okay, well, what are your fundamental assumptions about reality? And this is or rather, what are your fundamental assumptions about morality? What are your axioms? And this is basically a dead end, and this is why arguments take so long, is because I think most people have no clue what their axioms actually are. I think they just go around saying things implicitly. The axioms are in their brains, but they don't really conceive of them consciously. They just sort of use them without knowing what they are. And this is important in morality as well, because in morality, everything within ethics and morality is predicated on an some kind of emotional axiom that people have evolved to have. It's always predicated on some kind of emotional axiom. It doesn't follow from some kind of logical axiom that tries to describe reality. It will always come back to an emotional axiom, and I mean, it's important to try and figure out what that is, and that's actually what psychology is for, in trying to figure out, the deep instinctive motivations of the person. And that's really what it is. It's figuring out what the other guy's intentions are during the argument, because that's how you figure out what their emotional axioms are. And the third case is, I think, if I'm right in assuming that you can only compromise about something that is mimetic, not something that is genetic. The third case is trying to figure out whether the issue at hand is an issue that you arrived at through experience, or an issue that you arrived at through just genetic predisposition. And that is so hard to do because of this ties into nature versus nurture, obviously, but this is so hard to do because it's so hard to pinpoint which of the two things it is. And honestly, most beliefs and issues aren't just one or the other. It's not binary, it's a mix of both, right? Everything is sort of both genetic and mimetic. Some things are obviously more genetic, less mimetic, but other things are more mimetic, less genetic. And if it's something that's more mimetic, then you should be willing to compromise, because if it's more mimetic, then you should understand that it's your subjective experience that contributed to the view, not your genetic predisposition. That's just my rambling thought on how arguments should work. So, this is important for YouTube, because, again, I spent 120 comments talking to a guy, and I don't really know what it is I accomplished, whether I helped him, whether I convinced him, because I don't think he didn't convince me of anything, and maybe that was the problem. Maybe I should be more open to being convinced of things. Maybe I should be more open to being convinced and start out arguments by asking questions rather than by, asserting truths, which is what I tend to do. Is I tend to assert what I think is true rather than. I'm doing it right now. I tend to assert what I think is true rather than questioning what I think is true. And I'm even doing that now when I'm describing myself to you guys. It's kind of not something you can get away with. At least, I don't think it's easy to get away with. So, God, I lost my train of thought. The point is, YouTube is a terrible medium for argumentation. I think at best, I can present my ideas to you guys through video, but you can't really present yours to me. It's very difficult to present your ideas through text. I can watch a video and sort of try to understand your ideas, and you can explain them better in a video. In a comment, the most you can do is ask me a question. Or the most you can do is ask me a question or reference something that is relevant to the discussion. For instance, if I'm talking about nature versus nurture, you can reference a study and link it, and you can present what the argument in the study is. And if I'm ignorant on the subject, you can point out, oh, here's this source that elucidates the subject for you. And since I'm a commenter and I believe that you are a little incorrect about what you're saying, here's a source that gives you some more information. So you, the guy who's making the video, can go look at the information and figure it out. And my thing is, I tend to just make the video and give you my ideas. I'm not sourcing anything because this is all my stuff, right? It's all predicated on stuff I've learned and etc. But this is all uncomfortable because it's dependent on nature versus nurture. And I have a good friend named Jack who has very extremist views and thinking that it's all about nature. And I kind of want to say that that's demonstrably false. That nurture is has a huge effect as well. But due to the culture that we live in, a culture that's fairly socially egalitarian, where people all have the similar family-centric upbringings, very similar educations, that what you notice is genetic differences more so than mimetic differences, at least amongst certain groups of the population. Certain people are, oppressed or whatever, but because in our culture, in Western culture, we're not really encouraging people from birth to think a certain way on a lot of issues. A lot of people have this idea that we'll give people, will give you a taste of both sides, and you can decide, the child can decide for yourself what you want to accept. The only thing we want is for you to be happy. And so what you get there is you get to notice genetic differences between people more so than mimetic ones. If this was a world where everyone was a clone genetically, then you would notice mimetic differences, not genetic ones. And they do exist. If you took a society full of clones and you had to, and you oppressed a group of them, and you didn't oppress the other group, or you tried to convince a certain group in a certain religion, or you basically established mimetic differences, you would get differences between these various groups of clones. Some of them would have very different ideas from the others. Some would, they would probably have similar motivations, that they would have similar values in the end, but their ways of seeing the world would be different, I think. Religion, they would have different religions, for instance. Anyway, this, nature versus nurture is a whole big topic, but from what I understand, there's a consensus within the mud pie view of genes and environment is the consensus within the scientific community, and you have this whole thing about gene-meme interaction and gene-environment interaction. Again, I'm rambling. And this also ties into the libertarian versus egalitarian debate, right? Because I realized this during the discussion, libertarians believe in hierarchy, right? And they want hierarchies around. At least that's what they want, certain hierarchies around. You can't, want all hierarchies around because, just by behaving in a certain way, you are implicitly saying that other hierarchies aren't good for what it is that you're doing. So they want certain hierarchies around, but they don't want all hierarchies around. And likewise, libertarians, they don't want, well, they can't want all hierarchies not to be around. You can't have no hierarchies, that's impossible. They also want certain, but they differ on what hierarchies. I think libertarians, I've realized libertarians want for there to be only genetic hierarchies within society and to completely get rid of mimetic ones, and they see government as a purely mimetic construct, not a genetic one. And then there's egalitarians that want certain genetic hierarchies, or I mean, I guess egalitarians want only mimetic hierarchies and no genetic ones, but both positions are erroneous because there's no such thing as a purely mimetic construct within the society or a purely genetic one. There are some things that are more mimetic and less genetic, and there are some things that are more genetic, less mimetic, but you don't have, there's nothing you can point to that's purely, genetic. There's or purely mimetic. For instance, like a government oppressing people seems like a mimetic construct because we've all been raised to believe that the government is a thing that we should respect, but it's also a mimetic one because there's it's also a genetic construct to an extent because there's definitely a genetic component to the idea that governance should be a thing, because this is something that's been around ever since the earliest societies that back during like cave people or early day Homo Cro-Magnon societies have had some version of governance, so it can't be a purely mimetic construct. Likewise, trade, when we're trading things and I'm buying something from you, that's not purely a genetic construct either. There's a mimetic component to that. You could, for instance, be willing to give your stuff away for free to me if I'm someone who is poor and can't afford it. You could be willing to do that, right? So there's mimetic and genetic components of both. I don't want to get rid of all hierarchies. I want to get rid of certain hierarchies, dismantle certain hierarchies, and leave other hierarchies. Which hierarchies come and go, that's arbitrary, obviously, but then again, so is being a libertarian or an egalitarian, as I just said. Wanting all genetic hierarchies around and no mimetic ones is also just as arbitrary. And which view is more correct? I mean, it honestly depends. I try to orient my views based on what I think is best for the species, and I want what's best for the species because of a genetic predisposition that I seem to have. Again, I'm rambling. But, I mean, I also noticed that the difference between libertarians and egalitarians sort of illustrates why both groups aren't really correct, or why both groups seem to have it a little skewed in an extremist sense. I've had conversations, I mean, I could describe myself as an egalitarian. I've had conversations with libertarians, and I find a lot of the time is that we're talking about different things. They're talking about, I'm talking about, solving, doing things in the net benefit of society, and they aren't. Or they are using the same words, but what they view to be society's net benefit is different than what I view. I view happiness as a net benefit. They don't. They don't see happiness as a net benefit. They don't necessarily value that. They value liberty as a net benefit, even if liberty contains with it unhappiness. That's more of a thing that they care about. Right. So it boils down to fundamental, like, a lot of the time, at least from what I've noticed, between me and Brian, is like fundamental genetic differences between the two of us is what I think is happening. Because of fundamental differences in our genetic predisposition, I have different assumptions about what society should be like, and he has his different assumptions about what the world should be like. And we can't ever solve that. At least, I don't think we can. And, I mean, maybe it's not a genetic difference, maybe it's a cultural one, maybe it's a mimetic one, but if it is, then we need to have a different discussion. We need to start asking ourselves, or asking the other guy, well, where exactly did you attain your views, and how did they come about? Where did you learn to think the way that you do? Where did these ideas come from? Because again, it can't be purely genetic. Even if we try to isolate for the element of one's philosophy that is purely genetic, even that is still shaky at best, because it's hard to figure that stuff out. Anyway, oh god, I've rambled so much. This was a very rambly video. I honestly didn't know enough about what to talk about. Can you convince people of things? Can you convince people to think a certain way? On your own, within a discussion, can you convince the other side without compromise, right? Probably not. It's probably just, unless it's a question of math where there's an obvious right and wrong, you can't convince the other guy that he's wrong. If it's in math, you can. That's the only place. Or within science, something that was very STEM field stuff, stuff that where there's a very obvious right and wrong, but within morality, there probably needs to be a compromise on both sides in order to attain some kind of greater truth. Because even if, in principle, one of us is more right than the other, even if our attempt is more right than the other, then that doesn't matter, because there's almost a guarantee that we're not seeing the other side. Like, if you could see the other side, you wouldn't really be arguing, right? You would understand why the other person is making the claim that they are. And the fact is, you don't always see the other side, or ever, really. Those people on my Molyneux video start saying how I don't understand the NAP, and they disagree with me, but the thing is, I don't know why. I don't know why they disagree with me. I don't know them, and because I don't know them, I don't know why they disagree with me. And honestly, all I want is I just want one person to agree with me on something, and not someone who already agreed with me from the get-go. I want to start an argument with someone who disagrees and have them agree by the end of it. Maybe that's a wishful thinking, but I just want to experience this thing once in my life where, you prove someone wrong. And not about reality, not about the question of, not the question, not about it shouldn't be science-based where there's an obvious right and wrong. I want to convince someone on a moral issue. I want to see it happen. I've yet to see it happen. I've yet to experience this thing, and I think it's, oh boy, it would be great. Maybe you need some kind of huge influence or a huge intellectual weight to in order to do stuff like that. Like, you need to be an intellectual who's written books and books and books, like Noam Chomsky or something. But yeah, I think the point I'm making here is I'm no longer going to I'm gonna try. I'm sort of promising this now, but watch me contradict the self and be a hypocrite. I'm not going to respond to comments in the same way. I'm going to try not to. I'm going to, comments that sort of assert that I'm wrong, I'm not going to respond to them. Because of what I just said. Because of what I said is that you can't just assert the other guy's wrong. You don't know why they believe the thing that they do. I'm going to respond to questions. I'll respond to questions, and I'll ask questions. I'm not going to assert that one side is more right than the other, unless it is STEM field stuff, unless it is math, physics, biology, stuff where obvious right and wrong with, and even then, though, people could be, ignorant and uneducated and not know why, so it's better to just begin with a question. Begin every argument with a question. That's what you should do. That's what Socrates did, for God's sake. That's all he did, was he just kept asking questions until he found some kind of error, or he found something that was questionable. Because you're really in the dark if you're not questioning. unless it's something obvious, like, does the Earth go around the sun? That's obvious. Obvious right and wrong there, but when it's something complicated, like, and even things that are more or less black and white, like free will and determinism, begin with a question. Begin with a question. That should be the standard. And honestly, for you guys especially, if you're watching my stuff, then you should especially begin with a question, because I can't argue with you, right? I can only present my views. I can only give you a bigger idea of what I actually stand. Jesus Christ, my nose just keeps itching. Sorry. I can only give you a better idea of what it is I actually stand for. I can't argue with you effectively because we're arguing through text and we're arguing through comments, which means you're gonna write an essay, and 100-line essay, and then I'm gonna have to respond to like every point. Like, that's not a conversation. Is the most effective way at communicating. Really, a conversation is the most effective way at between human beings, that is, of transmitting information. Text is not. So, trying to communicate through text, trying to have an elaborate argument through text, who are you kidding? It's not going to get anywhere most of the time. And what the past 2 weeks have proven is that it doesn't get or it barely gets anywhere, right? And it takes so much longer for it to get anywhere than it would through conversation. In conversation, it could be done in an hour. You can get somewhere, maybe. But through text, it'll take hundreds of comments to get anywhere, right? Or like 70 plus comments. At least that's what I've noticed. So don't do it. Don't try to start arguments within the comment section. Ask questions. You can do that. Or make videos. But don't try to begin arguments, or at least be clear about what you're trying to accomplish. Because the chances of us being able to communicate effectively are slim. And like I said, there's three ways that this could end. We figure out that we have different definitions, great. Or we compromise with each other, great. Or we figure out that we have fundamentally different assumptions about it. But each of these three options can take forever to figure out. Ideally, I would have enough video content out there so that going into it what my fundamental assumptions are and what my definitions are, so that the only possible way that an argument could end is the third way, the compromising way. And you know what my experiences are, so you can know what the compromise. But you guys don't know me well enough in order to be able to say stuff like that. So, because this channel is still new, because you don't really know who I am and I don't really know who you are, other than a lot of you are libertarians for some reason, we should begin by asking questions rather than by making assertions. Unless it's a question of math, and it's not. So that's all I could say about that, and peace, cheers.